Okay, we're going to get started. I'm not sure what's going on with Almighty, but he should be joining hopefully soon, and we can just get started with introductions. This is a panel about really discussing the disproportionate ways in which the justice, legal, and political systems have impacted Black people in 2021, but not just talking about the ways in which it's impacted us, talking about ways of moving forward. So I'm really excited about this conversation. I am the moderator for today. I am one of the founders of Black Mental Wellness, the VP of Program Development and Evaluation. And this topic is really dear to my heart because I've worked in the prison system in a close security or higher security prison within the Georgia prison system for the past 3.5 years. And so I'm really passionate about the legal system and its impact on Black individuals. So let's just start off with introductions. And let's start with you, Mr. Hampton. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, yes, ma'am. Thank you very much for having me. I too think that this is a very, very timely subject, as well as one that has been has impacted our community for an awful long time. I served as a Metropolitan Police Officer here in Washington, D.C. from 1970 to 1994. I also served as a law enforcement fellow at the University of District of Columbia from 2000 to 2017. I have served as executive director of the National Black Police Association for 23 years, and presently I'm a member of Blacks in Law Enforcement of America, plus my daytime job that allows me and affords me the opportunity to do this work. I'm a social worker with the George Avenue Family Support Collaborative here in Washington, D.C., working with families and students around issues of attendance.
Okay, thank you so much. Ms. Keith, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you also for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Erin Keith. I'm here in my personal capacity today, but I work as a staff attorney at the Detroit Justice Center, where we serve formerly incarcerated and indigent clients with a plethora of different matters, from helping reduce back owed child support for people coming home from prison, to representing people in low-level misdemeanor offenses, to helping them regain their driver's licenses. We do a bunch of different types of representation. And then in addition to that, we also are involved with legislative reform efforts. So working on everything from defunding police, divesting to invest in communities, to cash bail reform, to decriminalization initiatives. So I'm excited to be here with you all. I'm a proud graduate of Howard University and Georgetown Law, and I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta, so hi soror. But yes, I'm really excited to be here, really passionate about these issues, and look forward to participating.
Hi, everyone. Hello from Houston, Texas. My name is Edria McKnight. I am a licensed attorney here in Houston, Texas. I own my own law firm, the McKnight Law Group, in which we primarily practice criminal defense. To date, I've represented over probably 1,000 people who have been accused with committing criminal offenses. Most of those people look like me. And so this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, as it is something that I deal with on a daily basis. I am from Michigan, born and raised. I attended the University of Michigan, and I graduated from Thurgood Marshall School of Law, as well, to all of my sorors. So thank you for having me.
Okay, perfect. And so because we can't have this conversation about navigating the justice, legal, and political system without first talking about mass incarceration, I just want to open it up to that conversation. Because mass incarceration continues to remain an issue for Black people in 2021, where we continue to be 5% more likely to be incarcerated than white Americans. I would like us to talk about how do we begin to reduce the disproportionate rate in which Black Americans are incarcerated. And so what are some current practices? And I would like to throw this out to you first, Ms. McKnight.
So I don't think there's one answer to this question. I think there's so many different layers to this question. But one thing that I always say to everyone is, do what you can when you can. And that means vote. When you have the opportunity to vote, be at the polls. A lot of people minimize local elections. Those people make decisions about policing in your neighborhood. That is an important tool to use. Those people make decisions about elections. You know, who's in the courts, who's passing down sentences, what the prosecutor is, what beliefs they're pushing, what agenda do they have. Those are things that we can do just ourselves. You don't have to be a lawyer to go to the polls. You don't have to be a legislator to go to the polls. And so I think people minimize the power of voting. So that's one thing that I always encourage people to start at is voting.
And so not to cut you off, but is there any information that you can tell us or the listeners in regards to where would they get that information from on who to vote for, how to, like, when selecting someone to vote?
So I think most candidates, or, you know, you can get a sample ballot before you even go to the poll. You can just Google sample ballots in your jurisdiction, and they have everyone that you need to know or who's going to be on the ballot. And then you can take it upon yourself to Google those people and see if you believe, you know, in the beliefs or agendas that they're pushing. Sometimes it's not about party lines. You know, a lot of people think you must vote one way to get a certain result. Sometimes people are pushing agendas who may not be aligned with your party. And so it's important to not only vote, but also be an informed voter when you do vote. Another thing that I always tell people that you can do is show up for jury duty. Every time I'm in trial, I feel like I am begging people who look like me to be there. They don't want to be there. They don't want to miss work. They don't want to make a decision about someone's life. They feel like it's too much pressure. They feel like it's an inconvenience. Yet we complain when verdicts are handed down that we don't agree with. So be present when you do have the opportunity to make a decision about someone's life. You literally have the opportunity to be justice in that situation. And so those are just two things that I always encourage people to do that they can do in their own capacity, and it costs them nothing.
Okay. And Ms. Keith, do you have anything to add to that? I know you're an attorney as well and dealing with the criminal justice system. What would you add to that?
I would just echo what Ms. McKnight stated. I mean, truthfully, participating and being informed is everyone's responsibility. It's not just a matter of if you know someone who's personally gotten locked up or you have a family member. The reality is anyone can be falsely accused of a crime. Anyone can be subject to overcriminalization by being policed. So it's imperative upon us to really be proactive, to read about different things that are happening in our communities, to potentially attend council meetings and things like that where they request public engagement. I can't tell you how many times a law might be passed and then people read about it in the news and they're like, what the heck? I would have said something had I, been aware that this was happening. We can't afford, there's too much at stake right now to not be engaged. So I would just echo that aspect of what Ms. McKnight shared.
And so you did hit a hot topic. And so there's so many hot topics that we're wanting to talk about in today's conversation about this topic. And so you talked about overcriminalization. And so what impact does the legalization of substances that have been previously used to overcriminalize Black people, such as marijuana, right? The selling or possession of marijuana have on society. But taking it a step further, not only what is the impact that it has on society, how can we advocate for those who are continuing to be impacted by what had previously happened before it was legalized?
Absolutely. And I'm going to refer to a couple of notes that I have because I'm really passionate about this issue. Just last week here in Detroit, we voted to decriminalize personal possession of what they call entheogenic plants, basically like mushrooms and things like that. And Michigan had already previously voted to not only decriminalize possession of marijuana, but to legalize possession of a certain amount. And the two are slightly different because one still allows for a person to receive a citation for possession, and the other makes way for the opening of dispensaries and the like. And so when you look at people who are still in prison for drug crimes for substances that have been legalized, it's an understatement to call that a problem, right? It's a cruelty, it's an injustice.
Exactly.
And I saw a meme recently that put it so perfectly. It was like, when the dispensaries start looking like Apple stores, it's time to free a lot of people. And the part we don't talk enough about is how incarceration for nonviolent drug offenses overcriminalizes addiction, right? When we look at the opioid crisis and things like that, that's considered a crisis. But when it was crack cocaine, it was, oh, they're just lazy and they're just drug addicts. It overcriminalizes desperation. It overcriminalizes poverty. And it's not just individuals whose lives are ruined in the process. It's the lives of communities, right? It's the mothers and fathers who are missing from their kids' lives, who now live in states where a white person is allowed to do these same things and generate revenue. And even for those who do their time at the state level and are able to go home, there's still various barriers that many people don't know about that they face, like being saddled with a felony and no work history. Some states won't even let you apply for public housing or food stamps with drug felonies. Michigan changed this law in 2020, but prior to this, I had clients literally calling me, coming home saying, I'm hungry and I can't apply for food stamps, right? And I was literally calling food pantries to find assistance for these individuals. Also, private employers can still require drug testing even for these legal substances, and not using them can still be a condition of probation or pretrial release with mandatory drug testing, even where these offenses are now legalized and dispensaries are now operating. And that's a whole separate issue, because in many states, you can't even open a dispensary if you have a felony drug conviction on your record. So you're barred from even entering the industry that you might be familiar with after doing your time. And so all of these things are extremely problematic at the federal level. Many of these offenses are still criminalized. And so it creates this piecemeal system where it's very confusing to the average person. And so in terms of what we can do about all of these overwhelming realities, first, again, start by looking things up. Does your state law bar those with felonies from having dispensaries or accessing public benefits? You can start by writing your council member and state legislator and asking them to take action. I can't stress enough how much emailing a legislator matters. Like, they're happy to hear from their constituents. They want to know what issues they should be working on. Michigan also recently expanded their expungement provisions to make it so that those whose offenses would not currently be illegal have a presumption of qualifying for expungement of that crime from their record, so removal of that crime from their criminal record. I would say advocating for similar expansions in your home state is also something that will go a very, very long way in terms of helping formerly incarcerated folks. So yes, a lot going on in that landscape. And it's extremely problematic to literally have people sitting in prison for things that are now legalized.
And thank you for speaking to that. I think you gave us a wealth of information on where to go, and the fact that it's continuing. Even though we're legalizing it, there are still a group of people who are still being impacted by it. And even when I worked in the prison system, it was still difficult. Even working in a closed security prison where people were fearful of their lives, right? The trauma that occurred, what they were exposed to. So now we're exposing people to more trauma, more experiences that can be harmful to them based on just our overcriminalization practices. So thank you for adding to that. And Ms. McKnight, do you have anything to add to that as well?
Just really echoing everything that Ms. Keith said in regard to how is it that slowly but surely states are legalizing the possession of marijuana. Texas is not one of them yet. They are a little bit behind the ball. They have legalized the possession of hemp, which is a whole nother thing, because it's really the same as marijuana, just the concentration levels are below a 0.03. So when you're on the streets, how do you know you're buying hemp versus unlawful marijuana? And so you have police officers still conducting many of their probable cause searches based off of the smell of marijuana. And unless you get before a judge who believes that that is not sufficient based off of the new law, then now you have a whole situation where you're potentially going to end up with a conviction, not only for drugs, but whatever may be in your car. And so it truly is problematic, which is when people always pose the question, do I feel like marijuana should be legalized? I always say I think it should be a global decision in regard to reforming prison sentences as well. I don't think you can have one conversation about the legalization of it without having the same conversation at the same table about reforming these sentences. So, again, it's something that needs to be addressed by the legislators. It is bigger than a problem, and there is not one solution because every state is doing so many different things that I almost wish the federal government would just step in and make a blanket rule.
And Ms. McKnight, you hit a great point, because I think for me, I saw it as a win when Philadelphia recently passed I believe it was a bill that said that they are no longer going to stop individuals for low-level traffic crimes or low-level traffic violations, which is huge to me. So they said the possession of or the smelling of marijuana will no longer be allow an officer to stop someone. Stopping them for a missing tail light or a broken tail light. So those things, it's like, while that's a win for Pennsylvania or for Philadelphia, the city of Philadelphia, how much can we globally or as a country, clap to that? And how likely are we to have that occur in Texas or somewhere else? But it's a small game, right? It's a small game. But speaking to your point, I think you're exactly right. Like, how do the federal government start to step in for that to happen on a national level? And so I would like for Mr. Hampton, for you to speak to, and I also want Ms. Keith to speak to this as well, about the defunding of the police. So we talk about the defunding of the police. That's a huge topic in 2020, 2021. But what else can be done, right, to eradicate the unlawful killing of Black individuals? And is defunding the police enough? But let's speak to that too. I still want us to speak to that, because some people may not be aware of what that entails and may have some issues with that. But I want us to speak to that. And what else should we be thinking about to combat some of the excessive use of force towards Black people?
Well, for me, first of all, I'd like to define what defunding the police means to me and the work that I've been involved in for years, because we have been talking about this for a long time. And it's simply the evaluation and analysis of the police department budget to examine the effectiveness of what it is that police do every single day or don't do in our community. The police budget in a given most cities is the largest line item budget in a city's budget. But yet, when we talk about the efficient and effectiveness of what it is that they do, it falls down. It does not meet the mark, and especially in the Black and brown and poor community, it just doesn't meet the mark. So I'm for taking money and examining and then taking that money and then putting it into the proper social service agencies that do that work. I'm for putting it in other innovative methodologies that address crime, because the police aren't the only individuals that address crime. From a preventive standpoint, there are a variety of measures that have been very successful in our community, and most of them have nothing to do with the police. And most of them have something to do with the people who live there, developing and implementing strategies to address public safety in their community. This may sound strange. I don't know if it's going to sound strange, but it may sound strange. I'm looking at abolition, because I don't know why we continue to invest in an institution that does not work. That, in other words, does not provide what it is that it was developed to provide. If policing was a plumber, we wouldn't be calling them, because if they didn't take care of what the plumbing issue was in our house, then we wouldn't be calling them back. If they were a Fortune 500 company, they would have probably gone bellied up a long time ago, because they're not addressing the issue. We had something here in the district where we talk about the increase in crime in other states. I'm familiar with Detroit. I'm familiar with Houston. I'm familiar with a whole lot of cities in this country, and I don't know of a city that does not necessarily have during the summer months an uptick in crime. Those are things that happen in the summer because the dynamics that take place in the wintertime changes in the summertime, and then because most crime that happens as a result of the opportunity to commit crime on the spur of the moment. Very seldom is it premeditated. Very seldom is it thought out. It's a fact of opportunity. And so when we start talking about the strategies to address those things and the police haven't been successful, why would I call somebody to do something that haven't had no success in doing it? It don't make sense to me. And I was in the police department. I was a police officer for 24 years. I know I know that their clothes are dirty. I know that the culture is upside down. I know that it's criminal. I've seen all of that. And when I saw it, I reported it. I spoke out against it. So this isn't something that you can sit on the sideline and talk about. This is something that you had to jump in the middle of and do it, because it requires you to be that way. Not only, and I'm not against voting. I've never missed a vote since they gave district, because there was a time when people in the District of Columbia couldn't vote. But when they said we could vote, I've been voting ever since then in my family. But the fact of the matter is that the real sense of holding our politicians and everyone else accountable, even government workers, take place after the vote takes place. And that requires you to be in the game, not watching it, not standing on the sideline, actually be in it. You have to be informed, and education are two different things. So you have to be educated, you need to be informed, but you need to be in the middle of it. And then we can do something about it, because change has not happened to the degree that we wanted to or needed to in this country as it relates to public safety.
And I agree with you. Before we throw it to Ms. Keith to follow up with any remarks she has, I just want to say I agree with you wholeheartedly about, even I hear you loudly and clearly that you worked in a police system and that you still want to hold them accountable. I worked in a prison system. I heard what was going on. I've seen officers, who were walked out of the prison, right, because of corrupt behavior. So yes, we must hold them accountable. We have to hold law enforcement accountable at every step of the way. And defunding the police potentially is one process in that. And so, Ms. Keith, what are your thoughts about defunding the police, and what other practices would you recommend or suggest in order to, prevent excessive use of force?
Absolutely. So first, before you can talk about why defunding is so necessary, I think you also have to refocus the conversation on what we could refund with that money. And I think so often we don't have that conversation. We stop at defund, right? So where I am in Detroit in fiscal year 2020, Detroit spent $317 million on the police department from the city's general fund, which is far more than the $22.5 million it spent on housing or the $12.7 million it spent on health. In fact, Detroit spends a third of its general fund on law enforcement. Meanwhile, and this is where this is important, Detroit has one of the lowest rates for solving violent crimes in the country. From 2010 to 2017, Detroit's average arrest rate for murder investigations was 41% and just 12% in rape investigations. Additionally, there's no clear correlation whatsoever between the number of police officers on the street and crime rates. Why is that? The police primarily respond to incidents after they've already occurred, right? And even then, many folks have experienced calling the police and watching them take a report that doesn't lead anywhere if they show up at all. So while we're putting money into policing, we shortchanged ourselves from, spending the $317 million to implement restorative justice, or to implement a child tax care income credit, or other things that will help Detroiters come out of poverty. And I think that that's the frustration, is that sometimes we get so hung up on should we defund them, should we abolish them, that we don't even focus on what we could fund if we did restructure budgets. What we could fund if we did have a public safety task force that wasn't necessarily armed for traffic stops.
Right.
And so to the second part of your question, how do we hold officers accountable? At the federal level, it would be legislators passing the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which would take a huge step of ending qualified immunity, which too often shields officers from facing any real consequences for the things that they do. As we saw in Breonna Taylor's case, it would be ending the use of no-knock warrants so that things like that can't happen. Reducing the budgets of police departments, again, to refund community investments like they've done in Oakland, California, for example, where they recently, their council voted to, defund their police department over a couple years to refund things like affordable housing and violence intervention programming. It will also be, this is a thing I've been reading up on a lot, creating a statewide or nationwide database that compiles police misconduct cases. So officers can't just hop from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, get a new job, or worse, become school resource officers and be in our, our public schools, our middle schools, handcuffing children. And then, yes, I just think, again, to echo Mr. Hampton's perspective, staying informed. When these things come up in your community, instead of just retweeting the video, say, I want to see these concrete steps. And if you all aren't familiar with the Breathe Act, that's like kind of a model piece of legislation that has 4 different demands that basically they're encouraging like local legislatures to pass a version of this that corresponds with their law. So that's something to read up on, the Breathe Act.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ms. Keith, for providing that insightful information. It was a wealth of information. And so thank you, Mr. Holly, for joining us. And we would like to just jump right in. If you don't mind, we only have a few more minutes, but if you could tell us, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, and I'll jump into asking you a question because you have a wealth of information as well to provide.
Sure, and thank you for the patience. And I'm middle-aged, so when I stick to Zoom, I guess that kind of had to change up a little bit, learning to hop in. But I'm a quick learner, so hopefully it's good. So I'm Elmadi Holly, Georgia State Representative. I'm here in Henry County. If you've been to Atlanta and you're familiar with the county, that Atlanta's in Fulton. South of Fulton is Clayton. South of Clayton is Henry. And so I've been in this position for 3 years. I flipped a Republican seat by the widest spread of votes at the time. I beat my sister Stacey Abrams' numbers by a thin margin. So but yeah, it's being in a county that was once the Clavering County for the Ku Klux Klan, and seeing a lot change. I definitely understand. Not only in terms of the responsibility that's upon us to make sure that we get it right once we get in, but we also, I didn't get here, just by doing some running. Part of us to understand the historical context of where our community, where our responsibilities lie towards one another. We have to really be engaged. We have to make sure that we're actively a part of changing that landscape politically, and that means dialing down our focus on the small local municipal races, those county races, and then bring it up even to the state House races and state Senate races. We have to make sure that we're a part of it. I truly believe that our money is required in order to get all of this running. And so when we allow for others to be actively a part of politics, we stay on the outside. All we're doing is telling people who have long been able to stay in power that we don't care to look over their shoulder to see where the money is spent. And I think it's really provided that we're maximizing our focus and our priorities, and to know too that it's not hidden. You want to get access to all the information, it's on this little thing right here. But if our focus is so much on the distractions at the time, Instagram, Facebook, I had to get myself off of it. TikTok, you can go down a little hole, but I think we're in a society where there's a lot to distract us, but we still have responsibility to turn off those distractions and go and actually find the truth. So But I'm glad to be at least to join you all. I'm running around to different events, so I'm now accessing you from the roof of my car. So this is all good.
So Mr. Holly, I just want to ask you a question. So to elaborate on some of the things you point. So what is your recommendation for how we stay steadfast in our advocacy for justice of Black lives without being jaded by the broken system or some of the issues that we continue to experience? Like, what is your recommendation for us to keep pushing forward? I know you highlighted, not necessarily stop the social media, but, reduce that intake a little bit. But what are some other recommendations that you have in regards to how we continue to push forward from that perspective?
Oh, yeah, sure. I believe when I was listening in, when I was trying to hook it up, I believe Aaron even highlighted on the point that we really need to focus on how we are. It's the connections. It's the connections that we actually have, and we're not identifying those. Something that I believe is necessary in communities is for us to do a lot of asset mapping. We really have access to the resources around us, but we're just not very cognizant of them. What I tend to do, and I encourage, this is something I really like to focus on, something that's free and available to everyone. When we go on Google, for instance, if you go to Google Earth, or either you have an app on your phone for Google Earth, or you can go and access it online. If you go to earth.google.com, it's a very grand look beyond Google Maps to actually look where our communities are. And what I've done is made sure that what we use in the voter outreach space, the software that we use targets voters, either low propensity voters, those who are least likely to vote, or those who may be swayed. Well, if you actually target your community for the resources that are there, then it'll help you in times where you need it for yourself or to direct other people to that. And so using Google Earth is an opportunity as soon as you identify a care or resource network that's there, literally do pin drops for the area. And you can segment which areas to focus on. That, for instance, if you need it for homeless services, if you have another for mental health awareness, like literally you can have color-coded maps and make it more available that will allow us to access it on a phone. That literally you can go to your phone and get it. The other side too is that because so many of us are just really working day to day, we're not really focused on. It's really hard for us to focus on where resources are when we need them. Part of being able to create this asset map, if you will, is that you get to share it and request invitations of others to actually participate in changing it. When we have a landscape whereby we're able to see those resources, that's what allows for us to take a better care for our communities, because we know how much everybody's vested. We actually are seeing them on the map. We know what our locale looks like. And again, that's really Sister Leader Stacey Abrams. I remember when she came down and endorsed my race. She said, she's a heavy sister. She's just really heavy. She said, evil does its best work in the dark. And I think that really speaks loudly to what a lot of our communities, where we have the full potential, but we just may not know what is around there, because we are in a state of darkness, and we have to shed a light on it. And really doing that level of asset mapping helps. It helps not only because we're identifying the community organizations that we know, but there's also behind every elected office, there's actually a network of 501c4 organizations. Those are nonprofits, but a little different. They're not your charities, so to speak. These are social action groups. There's 501c4s, 527 hybrids. These are organizations that are focusing particularly on electoral politics and getting people engaged. And so when you actually help to map that out in a digital space, again, Google Earth is free to everyone, then it really helps you to, it helps get some idea in terms of what's there, and actually gets you connected to not only the organizations you see, but specifically the good organizations that you don't see.
Thank you so much for that. I was actually trying to get it on my phone as you were saying it. I think that is a great resource. I'm interested in looking into it. I'm always looking for different nonprofits and organizations. Before I worked in a prison, I worked at a homeless shelter. It's one of the largest in Georgia, homeless shelter for youth. And so I think it's great to be able to access those resources to see what communities are coming equipped with before we advocate for more or so I think that thank you so much for that resource. So for everyone listening, you said it was Google Earth, or what was it?
You can go either go online to Google Earth, or you can type in your web browser earth.google.com, and all it takes is you having a Gmail account. Sure, something anybody can get, a homeless person get off the street. I particularly use the one that I have to help veterans in our area, particularly within my county, especially after the pandemic. We had about 300 before, maybe afterwards, upwards and like double that. And many times veterans themselves, because they go through an environment that is specifically focused on identifying what they can do on their own. We either have some who are not necessarily on the streets. They'll be in a motel or a small hotel or boarding houses, and then others are in the woods. Because remember, we're talking about survivalists. And so it really helps them when you actually can show them that they can pull it up on their phone, a map to where it is in their location. And particularly if you find veterans that are specifically focused, have a GIS background, it helps them. And so it really helps with the communities helping each other. And I would always encourage people as well to really take your libraries, treasure your libraries as much as you do Barnes & Noble. You pay taxes for these, and we often look at them as places where books go to die. But I can promise you that you have greater access, especially to databases for journal information, for those who have, want to get the small business. You have easy access to the small business development centers through the U.S. Small Business Administration, but also the agencies that you pay taxes for. And if we don't have to operate too far outside of what we've already paid for.
Right.
But yeah.
And I like that you said that too about accessing the library. We can have access to grant resources, different information regarding like how to support businesses and small businesses and things of that sort. Thank you so much for that. And so we have to start wrapping up. We have until about 2:50 to answer questions. We're already around about 2:42. And so there's not many questions in the chat. So if anyone has any questions, please put your questions in the chat. But one question that is actually thrown in there. And there's one question that I definitely want to come back to if we have time. But for now, let me just get to this question that's in the chat. Someone says, how can we strategically use social media to promote active political engagement and to share accurate information? And I know, Mr. Holly, you referred to this one resource, but does anyone have any information on how we can use social media to promote active political engagement and share accurate information? Because there's always questions about what information is accurate out there.
Right. No, I agree. The thing about social media is so powerful, especially the way it's used by the younger generation. I mean, you can really affect change through Instagram. The way these videos of these police are being shared, I mean, the way they go viral. This police killings haven't just started happening, right? Now they're recorded, they're shared, they're reshared, and then the pressure of that can really affect change. And so I think it's important to share correct information. Obviously, you want to do some research before you share it, but I also think people should utilize it in a way that if they see something that they don't like at the police station. I'll give you an example of the other day. I didn't like the way my client was being treated in jail. He was being held in isolation for a low-level offense. He had been there for a month, and they were saying it was because of COVID. I added the sheriff's department and said, why is my client being held this way? He's a low-level offender being held in maximum security. Why is this? They responded. And so you never know the power of social media. People, these companies, agencies, the DA's office, they all have social media accounts. And believe it or not, they have people that they've hired to monitor those accounts because they don't want bad news about them out there either. Pretty much every major sheriff's office, police department, every agency right now has a social media account. So I would say don't be afraid to add them. Don't be afraid to slide in their DMs. You would be surprised by what responses you'll get. Same with legislators. I wouldn't recommend sliding into judges' DMs, but pretty much everyone has a social media account that you should use.
Thank you. Anyone have anything to add to that? So I wanted us to hit on most of the main topics for today, and we have a couple minutes left, and we cannot go through without hitting on critical race theory. So we talked about mass incarceration, defunding the police. I would like us to just spend a second on critical race theory. And so I would like to ask anyone out there, any one of you guys, what are your thoughts on critical race theory? And as it's being limited or eradicated in the school system, but also how is it increasing or creating disparities in the criminal justice system?
I'll roll with that. It's cool. So let me say, let's get real, right? So this critical race theory is for my panelists who operate in a law environment, understand that this is particularly the theories on critical race actually are not really applied much in a sense of on public school level. This is something that is in particularly within law schools that focus on this. But because the right wing, those who wish to make America great again, are very much focused on this. This is a distraction. I think that for many of our communities who have had access to caring professors, those who go beyond the book to actually find material that's relevant in order to give us a proper place in context in terms of how we focus on our society and the not only the inner struggles of the people within, but also some of those old histories that are not found in the book. I'm in Georgia, and for those of us in Georgia, we know our Georgia history. That at the end of the Civil War, a very concerted effort was made in order to make sure that the lost cause or those in the Confederate Army, that a lot of that information was to be found inside of the textbooks, which meant limiting the access or the contributions for African-American professors, certainly those who are representative of communities that themselves were marginalized during the time of the Civil War. So the lost cause narrative got put in there. And so if anything, and we've seen through the 1619 Project or Howard Zinn, Zinn's education project, which really now focuses on taking these experiences from the past, providing the proper context for that time, and actually incorporating that into the truth so we get a full and balanced picture of that. We'll understand that racist society, those who themselves are racist, or at least by their actions are certainly shown that they are, wish to keep that information quiet. We all seen pictures of bodies being lynched. They would hate for you to see that when you look at those pictures, you're able to see their granddaddy or their auntie in the background who didn't do anything, but it very much was a participant in that activity. That's what we're seeing is the level of shame. People just don't want to come forward and say, you know what, my ancestors, they did not act in a manner that I choose to act, or I am not proud of their decisions or their behavior. Let's just accept that. Instead,
or we can see how it's passed down.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want it passed down, right? Because the thing is, we know that if you, those things can, if you don't recognize them in the past, that they can continue in the future. And so that's why that's the whole part of that critical race theory. But I think I want to pivot on this, and I'll leave it to my panelists. One of the reasons why we have to remain vigilant, if we ever want to know, well, is it effective? Are we going anywhere? Well, let me tell you, as a state legislator, I get emails from my Republican constituents asking for Georgia's participation in the Article 5 convention. And put that very clearly, Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution allows for a redraft of the Constitution if that U.S. Constitution is found not to fit the population, if it doesn't satisfy Americans' needs. Well, understand, when I get the right-wing folks sending me a request so that our state can be one of the 28 states that have already provided for a delegate to appear at this convention, what they're really saying is this, that the U.S. Constitution, which was never made to include the rights and responsibilities of persons of color, is now, or over time, is actually being used as the tool that is granting us the freedom to be able to get what our tax dollars claims we are supposed to get. So again, I would never get those letters for us to have a constitutional convention, to reinvent the Constitution, so that this contract, this social contract that is this Constitution, would have to be changed over to make sure that the limited few could only have the full rights and responsibilities that were granted to them when the Constitution was first drafted. So I would say we have to remain vigilant, because we are actually winning in this opportunity for us to be included into this document, to make sure that our rights and responsibilities are respected at that level, and that is respected in whatever state we are in. But understand that all that we're doing right now, that our ancestors are doing, and us moving forward, we're actually getting real results. If we weren't getting results, I wouldn't get those requests for us to redraft this Constitution. We're doing the right thing.
Thank you for that. And just to wrap up, I'm allowed, we can let Ms. Keith have the, to end this and what you have to add to that.
Well, no, I was just going to tackle the last part of your question in terms of specifically how bringing it back home, not learning our history perpetuates criminal justice, right? And criminal injustice, I should say. I think if we really had critical race theory accessible to us in schools, you'd learn about, why crack and cocaine were charged and sentenced differently, leading to, more African-American people serving time on average under the 100-to-1 disparity that was literally in place for years. African-Americans served virtually as much time in prison for nonviolent drug offenses as whites did for violent offenses. You'd learn why redlining exists. You'd learn why stop and frisk laws were expanded. You'd learn why pretextual stops are allowed, why Black people are over-policed and over-sentenced. You'd learn why Black on Black crime is a myth, and that, white people also kill more white people. But when's the last time you heard the term white on white crime? So I think the notion that Black people are inherently more violent has been used to justify our mistreatment since slavery. And I think most importantly, the reason why there's so much opposition to learning critical race theory, because all it's encouraging is critical thought, right? Being a critical thinker, we'd be mad. We'd be mad. And our country can't afford for us to be as mad as we should be about the injustices our people have suffered. But I do think it's our responsibility to use Google and to use the resources that we have available to us to be empowered and to recognize, how our communities have persevered, how strong Black people have been, not only mentally, but physically, to endure some of the things that we've overcome. And so if I am the last word, I would say, just harping on that we are such a strong people, and that is what, no matter who's opposing us learning our history, if we know that, we can accomplish a lot of things together.
Yeah, and it's so powerful for us to learn our history too, not just for other people who to learn our history, but it's important for us to learn it, right? So we don't understand, like, why are we from, why do we have disadvantage? Not to continue our mentality of why we come from lack. No, we need to change that narrative. We don't come from lack. We don't have a lack of, we keep soaring despite the conditions that we're put in, despite, like you said, the redlining practices, etc. So all that said to say, thank you guys so much for the insight that you gave us today, the critical thinking, the next steps, and hopefully we can have more panels and discussions like this. Thank you guys.
Thank you.